I know I'm getting started on this a little bit later than I hoped I would. So, just like last Saturday, I did a live stream about mental health and we talked about anxiety. I want to follow up on that a little bit. And tonight we're going to talk about a very important issue, something that a lot of people need to hear about. And it's about being in abusive relationships. And especially what I'm going to deal with are narcissists. And when I say narcissist, that can be loosely defined as someone who doesn't care about the feelings of others. So narcissists are people that really only care about themselves and their own feelings, and they'll use others to get what they want, but they don't really have the capacity for emotion or empathy or feelings towards others. And it can be very difficult and tricky when you're in a relationship with someone like that. So I'm also going to talk a lot about manipulation, and I want to differentiate a little bit that narcissism is a personality type. So it's kind of the way someone is, it's their characteristic. Manipulation is a tactic. So pretty much all narcissists are manipulators, but not every manipulator is necessarily a narcissist. But we want to keep it from getting too complicated tonight. So let's just mainly keep our focus on being in these kinds of relationships. And this isn't just about a marriage. Like, you could be in a relationship, a domestic relationship, like a boyfriend and girlfriend or husband and wife, and one of those people can be a manipulator or abusive or whatever. But these kinds of relationships, they don't really know any particular type. Like, parents can be abusive towards their children. Children can be narcissist manipulators towards their parents, and often are. It can be a relationship between two siblings. It can even be, a relationship with your coworkers, or if you've got a manager at work. I mean, teachers can be this way with their students. I mean, narcissism knows no boundaries, so it can cover just about anything. So I guess what I want to do is I'm going to try. There's a lot to talk about here in this video tonight. So we're going to go through and I'm going to just list all the different methods that I can come up with, or that I've researched personally, or that I've experienced myself. And so there's probably a lot of manipulator tactics or, narcissist methods or personality types that we're not going to be able to cover. But I mean, these are either the most common or, to me, the most pernicious. So first of all, if we go back to something that I said last week in that talk, like the first foundation for me, so this is my introduction again, is that, like, what you have to understand about humans is that not that long ago, maybe a few thousand years ago, we lived in the wilderness. Like, we didn't have civilization yet. We didn't have school buildings and work buildings and office buildings and construction sites and any of that. We lived in caves. We lived out on the plains. We lived by fires at night. And, our brains are wired to survive in that kind of an environment. And unfortunately, even though we've civilized and we've ascended to this high plane, our minds and, the way we're born and brought into the world hasn't really changed. So we're still trapped in that mindset. And this is actually, to me, how you can explain just about every common mental illness nowadays. So if you even go to anxiety or autism or attention deficit disorder and bipolar disorder, all these things that, humans are so commonly afflicted with in modern society really has to do with the fact that there are a lot of things lurking in our psyche and our subconscious that go back to our primal, prehistoric, pre-civilization ancestry, survival strategies, internal mechanisms in our minds, the way our minds are wired that drive us towards survival and that are about encouraging us not to, be left alone or to be eaten or to starve. I mean, we still have internal mechanisms to worry about famine and thirst and drought and starvation and being eaten by predators, even though we don't have to worry about those things anymore. And so one of the first things that humans do to try to survive is we naturally gather in hierarchies. And so you see this basically all across human civilization. It's universal, this phenomenon where you'll have a person, usually a man, the patriarchy, at the top, and then you'll have some lesser important people, but still powerful under him, and then it kind of forms like a pyramid. And these are hierarchies. And so hierarchies are very successful, and they help us to survive. And so when we're naturally inclined towards these hierarchies, and we see a lot of animals. Really, it's a common mammalian trait because humans are mammals. Where to survive in these brutal terrain and environments, what we'll do is we'll form naturally towards these social hierarchies. You see this all the time. Like, for example, that's why the Catholic Church has a pope. That's why America has a president. That's why nations had kings. That's why companies have CEOs. You know, like, we naturally group ourselves together that way with a layered dominance hierarchy. And people are always wanting to ascend to the top of that because in our survival mechanisms in our minds, like, if you can climb higher on the social ladder, it increases your odds of survival. You know, getting powerful makes you more likely to survive. It means that you'll be stronger. You'll be more apt at fighting off, wild animals or something like that. And so humans will fight to ascend and to dominate others to get to the top of these social hierarchies. And that's why you have, like, when people try to get promotions at work and, and we will tear ourselves apart trying to get there. Like, we will be vicious towards one another when we compete for either resources or to ascend on dominance hierarchies. And chimps do that too. Like, chimpanzees, man, they will rip each other limb from limb for status, for resources. And so humans do this, and we form these social groups, and we tear each other apart trying to get to them, trying to rise up in them, and we're brutal towards one another. I mean, that's why, and you're seeing, racist riots going on right now, and that's just an unbelievable tragedy. But, why is racism a thing? Why is war a thing? Why do we hate each other? Why do we hate people who are different from us? And we fantasize about conquering them, about conquest, about dominance. You see this over and over again. You see it in political parties. You got Republican on one side and Democrat on the other. And we fantasize on both sides about conquering the other side, about defeating them in elections and defeating them in debates. And they will, they will subsume, they will surrender while we conquer and we roar our chest. It's wired into the human brain to long to conquer people. And so there's a natural tendency towards dominance, because dominance makes you feel like you're more likely to survive, that you're more likely to reproduce, that you're more likely to, hand your genes down to the next generation, to get all the food, to get all the resources, to stay alive longer. So it really emerges from that fear of death. And so on a smaller scale, like we have, on the big scale, wars and, corporate buyouts and just all these strange phenomenon that can be explained this way about human behavior. And the one that you're here to hear about is narcissism, is about dominance within the family. And so, like I said, I could get into all the why is someone a narcissist. And often that's what we try to do. When we know a narcissist, we try to figure out what happened to them, what happened in their childhood. And honestly, you might be able to find better answers to that in my last video. But what we're here to talk about is, I guess I'm not offering any big solutions, but I'm, going to try to help you shed light on narcissistic behavior, how to tell if you're in a narcissistic relationship, how to tell if you're in an abusive relationship, the different types. And I'll give you some idea of how to get out of them, but I can't pretend that I know all the answers either, because this is a very complicated issue with a lot of complicated things to cover. So, first of all, narcissists don't care about the feelings of others. And so if you've ever experienced this, it can be very frustrating if you see a woman, for example, and she's in a marriage and she's been beaten by her husband or her boyfriend, and you go up to her and you try to help her, what does she say? She defends the guy. She says, mind your own business. She stands up for him. And it's really strange because you think, well, he's beating you. He's actually giving you a black eye. He, put you in the hospital. Like, why are you defending him? But that's because she's been manipulated. She's living in a manipulative relationship. And so she'll defend the guy, because what narcissists do is, when you're in a relationship with that kind of person, it's kind of strange. They install a version of themselves in you, in your subconscious. So if you think of yourself as the clay and them as the potter, they'll actually put in your mind a copy, like a mini-me version of themselves in your mind. And so when you hear that abused spouse defending her husband, it's because he's put a clone of himself inside of her, and he's defending himself through her. So she's like a puppet, and he's like just using her to talk and say, mind your own business, or it was an accident, and when they say things like, oh, well, I deserved it. Oh, well, I needed to be beaten, and I made him mad. Don't make him mad and he won't beat you, and you're trying to get this woman to stand up for herself, and she won't do it. And it's because of that. It's because, it's like narcissists, it's almost like there's someone else inside of you, somebody like an alien getting ready to burst out of your chest, like you've got this foreign organism living inside of you. That's what the narcissist does. That's what it's like being in the relationship with them. And I know that can be very frustrating. So running through, when I said that I was going to cover as many of the narcissist tactics, the manipulative tactics that they use, there were so many, I almost had trouble. I had to write them all down, and there's probably more that I haven't thought of, or maybe I'll think of it later after this broadcast is over. And so the first one is what I just talked about, which is actually a little bit obvious. That's physical abuse. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who's physically abusive, they hit you, they beat you, and like I said, that's kind of on the nose. So the rest of them that we're going to talk about are a little bit more pernicious and a little bit more common and widespread. But so physical abuse, the first cliche we think of is what I just talked about. You have the abusive husband and his wife, or boyfriend and his girlfriend, that he uses physical intimidation. And I knew a girl once who was in this kind of a relationship, and her boyfriend had never hit her, at least not that she admitted, but she said that he threatened her, that he was physically intimidating towards her, and it was like if he got up in her face and he slammed his fist on the desk in front of her on the table, and he said, don't you ever leave me, and don't you ever leave the house, or I'm going to do this. So he would give her these threats, and she would defend the guy, and it was kind of amazing. But it's because there's that fear of, well, if I leave this person, they'll hurt me physically, they'll beat me. And so physical abuse is just an absolutely terrible, appalling form of abuse. Typically more common with men. Men will be the ones who are physically abusive towards women. It's not unheard of and does happen for women to be physically abusive to their male partners, their husbands or their boyfriends. But the real one that we need to talk about and be frank about is children. So this is typically parents who are physically abusive towards their children. Now, I know I've got a lot of Christian followers who are watching this, and I'm not talking about spanking. I'm talking about physical abuse. I know spare the rod, spoil the child. I get that. But you do not want to physically strike your children, like in the face. Like, you don't want to give your children a black eye. You don't want to hit them in the mouth. You don't want to give them bloody lips. Excuse me, my light just went out here. There we go. Because that is a form of narcissistic manipulation, and that's installing a reign of terror in your children. And I know children can be annoying. I know they can be disruptive. I know they can be rebellious. But the answer is not to physically abuse them. And the abuse of children is just so common and widespread. And it is becoming more taboo. Like, you'll see people who talk about, elderly people. Back in the day, my dad used to take me to the woodshed all the time, and I honestly think hitting children with a belt is a bad idea, hitting them across the back or the backside. See, when children are growing up and their nervous systems are still forming, you can seriously damage their pain receptors by doing that. And you can also, just the devastating consequences of that kind of abuse that they'll carry with them their entire life. So, like I said, physical abuse is the most obvious form, but let's go into some of the more pernicious forms of abusive relationships, about the kind of manipulation tactics. So for one, you're in the relationship with a person and you're constantly arguing with them, and yet you never seem to be right. No matter what you do, you always lose the arguments. And there's an old saying about the game of chess, and you're not going to have to know how to play chess to understand this, that if you're reacting to your opponent's move, you've already lost the game. So every act you make is a defensive move. Like, so if he brings out his queen or his knight or his rook or his pawns, and you're constantly reacting to that defensively, like, oh, I've got to move out of the way here. Oh, he moved here, I got to move out of the way there. You've already lost the game. Like you are going to lose. It's inevitable. And it's the same way with relationships like that, where you're in an abusive relationship and that person who's a manipulator somehow always wins the argument, and you don't know how they do it. And it's because you're always reacting to what they say, and you're never right. And in their mind, you're never right. And trust me, the thing about narcissists is they are never wrong in their minds. They will never own up to anything. They will never admit that they've done anything wrong. And so it can be very difficult to be in that kind of... So let's take a particular example, because I want to use examples to get this stuff across. I could go into all the technical, psychological phenomena details, but that's not going to be very helpful. So let's go into specific examples. Like, let's say, they say the most important thing is money in a relationship, and it's true. Like, money isn't the most important thing. It is the thing. And it's the reason most marriages fail that do. And the reason for that is, like, people need to be honest with each other about their finances. So it's really good for the husband and wife to always share their purchases with each other and not hide money from one another. And so if you have a husband who goes out and blows all the money on things for himself, and, like, the family is going hungry at home and he's going out and he's buying something real expensive like a new car or whatever that they can't afford. And so he tries to hide that from his wife. So that's a narcissist, and that's a manipulation tactic, trying to hide those kinds of finances. But now what happens is the wife finds out and she gets angry. She's like, we're starving at home. Why did you go out and buy this thing you can't afford? So if he's a good manipulator, what he'll do is he'll turn it around back on her and somehow make it out like it's her fault. He'll make her feel like there's something wrong with her for asking the question. Oh, there you go again. Oh, there you go again, trying to stop me from making those purchases. You're trying to take away all my fun in life. I can occasionally spend money on myself. And, so he's twisting the reality into himself being the victim, and he's making her sound like the bad guy, and he's making her feel like there's something wrong with her for expressing a legitimate concern that he shouldn't be out, blowing, marriage with money, everything, mine is hers and hers is mine. And so for a husband or a wife, wives do this too, they'll go out and blow all that money and, go on shopping sprees and buy all those shoes and things like that. But if they try to hide that from their husbands, or if their husbands say, that's enough, we need to put a stop to this, and she says, there you go again, and she'll make it sound like it's his fault that she spent the money. See, with manipulators and narcissists, you're never right. You're always defending yourself, and somehow you still feel like it's always your fault. No matter what you do, somehow it always gets turned around on you. It's always your fault, even when you had a legitimate concern. So you're always the problem. They're never the problem. And you always feel like the problem, and they never have to own up to being the problem. So that phrase, that's typical of you. That's a classic line out of the narcissist manipulator's playbook. So let's say also, for example, if, the husband has gone away at work and he, is spotted with an attractive female coworker going out late at work or whatever, and the wife finds out about it. And when she confronts him, and he not only, he doesn't just deny it, but he also says, and that's typical of you to be suspicious of me like that. That is so typical of you. So he turns it around on her and makes it sound like it's her fault somehow, even though, so he never has to take responsibility. He doesn't have to own up to the fact that it was perfectly legitimate and reasonable for her to be suspicious, to be worried that he might be having an affair because he was spotted with an attractive woman. It's totally legit to feel suspicious about that. But he'll not only not own up to it, but he'll go out of his way to make sure that she feels like it's her fault and there's something wrong with her for asking the question in the first place. So narcissists never take the blame. They always deflect the blame onto the other person. And so what they'll also do, they get a free pass on doing whatever they want, but also any criticism that they receive, they take it to the extreme and try to make it into they're being a victim somehow. So, for example, the husband who went out and, blew all that money, and the wife acts upset about it and says, you should have consulted with me before you spent that money. He'll instead of being honest about that, he'll turn that into, you're trying to never let me have any fun. I just wanted to spend a little money on myself and you won't allow it. How could you? You're so bad. You're such a bad person. And so he puts that around on her. And so then her feelings are never legitimate, but his feelings are always legitimate. See, that's the clever trap of the narcissist and the manipulator. They'll make you feel like, that your feelings never matter and their feelings are always the only thing that matter. So manipulators or narcissists are all about control, and manipulation is the tool that they use to gain that kind of control. And so, I made this list of all the different types I could think of, and some of them are going to sound a little crazy, but trust me, these are way more common than you think. And the first one, believe it or not, is actually tantrums. So if you tell the narcissist they can't have something or, out of responsibility or whatever, and they really want that thing, they might actually start acting like a child. And, have you ever seen a 2-year-old throw a tantrum? It's a horrifying sight. Their faces turn red and their eyes swell shut and they scream and tears are running down their cheeks and they stamp their feet and they... you told them no, they can't have that toy they want, and they're just screaming and pounding their fist. And when toddlers are doing that, it's a terrifying thing. When you see adults do that, it's scary. It's really frightening. It's more disturbing than when a child does it. You kind of expect that behavior from children. But adults will do that. Manipulators, narcissists, when they don't get their way, when they want something, they will twist it into they're not getting what they want because they're being victimized. Poor me. I just want to eat at this restaurant and you're not letting me. And then they'll start just screaming and crying and throwing tantrums and stamping their feet on the ground and screaming, I want it, I want it. And that's more common than you think. And I can give you specific examples of adults that do that. So, the famous R&B singer R. Kelly, who has recently gotten into a lot of trouble because he's used his fame to get like underage girls to join a weird sex cult that he has at his private mansion. And, this has been going on for years, and it's even been caught on camera, him committing pedophile acts on underage girls. And, he's using his fame, his power, his money, his resources to get away with just some of the most atrocious behavior. And, the girls are like in this weird cult where they worship this guy. And just because he's famous or a great singer, they think he's like a god and they'll do anything for him. And it's just really sick stuff. And so when he was confronted about that, I think the reporter was Gayle King. She did an interview with him on national television, and they're sitting down with us one-on-one. And he did the tantrum. He started screaming. He started crying. And, if we watch that, this man's over 50 years old, and you're watching this man just crying and, just acting like a victim. And he screams at Gayle King for asking these tough questions about, are you a pedophile? Are you doing this? Do you have a sex cult at home? Are you guilty of these accusations? And he's going, I'm in the fight for my effing life. And he's just like throwing his arms like that. And then he gets up in tears and he storms out of the room. And as an adult, we're watching that and we're thinking, boy, that guy's crazy. What's up with him? He's a manipulator. And he's using the tantrum to try to get his way. And no, you may not have bought it. And Gayle King may not have bought it. And the average adult may not have bought it. But R. Kelly doesn't need us to get it or to buy it. He needs his followers to buy it. And if he can get just enough, like there's still young teenage girls that just adore the man and think he's, like a god or something. He just needs to win them over. He just needs to keep getting their approval. And if his, the girls that he has sexual relationships with in his creepy harem in his mansion or whatever, if they watch it on TV and they see that, they're going to come to his defense. They're going to see him crying and it, they'll have like motherly instincts that come out. Oh, poor R. Kelly, they're being mean to him. Oh, our poor man, they're hurting him. We need to protect him. We need to comfort him. So throwing tantrums is a way to sort of put yourself in an inferior role, to shrivel up, to make it look like, oh, I'm being abused, I'm being hurt. And then like the people who may be giving you legitimate criticism and saying you need to change your behavior, it'll twist them into saying, oh, well, I guess we're being too hard on you. They're there. Let's comfort you. We're sorry for how we treated you. And so it's an attempt to, once again, manipulation is all about twisting the reality of the relationship into something that it isn't. And it's always about, playing the blame game and being the victim, when in reality, the narcissist or the manipulator is the perpetrator. So we have tantrums, and I want to warn you, parents, if you have a toddler that you're raising and that toddler has learned that if they don't get their way, like if they want a new toy or whatever they want, if they can scream and cry and pitch a fit and stamp their feet and throw a tantrum, and you give them what they want, you're teaching them in life, in the world, you're forever imprinting it on their mind that if anytime they want something, all they have to do is throw a tantrum and they'll get it. And that, once again, is manipulation. So we expect a toddler to do it, but in reality, toddlers will continue that behavior into adulthood. And you are raising a future narcissist when you raise your children that way. So please do not, when your child wants something and you don't give it to them and they throw a tantrum, don't give in. You've got to teach them that throwing tantrums are not how to have relationships with people, not how to get what you want out of people. All right, so we talked about tantrums. Now let's talk about fear. And fear is actually the most effective tool in controlling people, in scaring people. If you can scare people, you can have total control over them, because when people are afraid, they're looking for someone to do something about it, and we're seeing a lot of fear going on in this country right now, especially with these riots going on. But people who are afraid are easier to control. So manipulators and narcissists will actually try to make you afraid of the outside world, the world outside of them. So that's why often in these kind of relationships, you see them, they'll tell you, well, if you ever leave me, or if we ever break up or whatever, you'll be alone. You'll never find anyone else. They try to instill that fear in you from ever leaving them. And that way they can continue having control over you. And, I've seen that so many times where you've got, somebody who's in an abusive relationship, but they won't leave it because they always say, well, but if I don't want to be alone. So they've convinced them that they'll be alone if they leave them. And humans don't respond to being alone very well. So fear is a very insidious method that, manipulators. Now, I know a lot of cults do this too. And this is something that you see in cults all the time, is that, and I know the Bible says, be not conformed to this world, but religious cults like, that take it way too far. Like, we'll say, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they take that to such an extreme degree that they use that scripture and they create a complete total fear of the outside world, where anything outside of this little group, anything outside of our church, out of these four walls in their kingdom hall meetings, anything is the world, and it's controlled by Satan. So if you leave these four walls, you're under the spell of Satan. And, they'll use that fear. Like, the Jehovah's Witnesses have some really frightening teachings on Armageddon. They teach that their church and their church alone is going to survive when Armageddon gets here. They don't believe in the rapture. They just believe that Jesus is waiting up in the sky and Armageddon's going to happen at any moment, and only the Jehovah's Witness church is going to be saved. And so they use that fear to keep people from leaving. And so fear is a brutally effective way. And so the other thing, too, is this is actually why I'm usually skeptical of conspiracy theories. And I realize that conspiracies do happen, and I'm not pro-government. Trust me, I'm not defending the government. But when I hear people talk about conspiracy theories, about how, the CIA is secretly behind this or that, or how, there's a plot to take our freedoms away. And I'm not denying that. I know government is all about power. Trust me, I'm a conservative myself. I'm very anti-big government. But we also have to be careful that conspiracy theories are very, very popular with cults. And there's a reason for that, because if you can really scare people into believing that once they leave, they're going to lose all their freedoms, they're going to be taken by the government, they're going to be tortured, they're going to be thrown in prison, they're going to be, have these horrible things done to them. So, like, for example, the Jim Jones cult, man, they were full of fear. Jim Jones was, and I hate to say anything positive, but he was very intelligent. He was a malevolent genius when it came to manipulating people. And so you can go back and study the history of Jonestown, and you can ask the question, how in the world did he get, this 900 odd people to drink Kool-Aid laced with arsenic and kill themselves just because he told them to? But if you go back and look at the history over the church that he founded and their movement, you can see his brutally effective manipulation strategies that have been going on and on and on and on. And one of them was conspiracy theories. He was always telling his flock that outside of the church, outside of Jonestown, the world was evil and they hated black people, and they're going to take black people, and, if you leave us, the white man will torture you and execute you, and he'll, do all these horrible things to you, and they don't allow whites and blacks to be together, and, just creating this ridiculous fear of the outside world, to where his followers were convinced that if they left, all these horrible things would happen to them. So they were under a state of great fear. So manipulators will make the outside world, the world outside of your relationship with them, like radioactive. They'll make it frightening to you in your mind. Like, if you leave me, all these terrible things will happen. You'll die, you'll catch diseases, you'll get sick, or I'll die while you're gone. And when you come back, you'll find me laying there dead, and you'll really feel sorry then. And so that gets us into the next manipulation tactic, which is guilt. And this one is especially bad with parents towards their children. And unfortunately, that's a much harder kind of relationship to escape, because, they're your parents. They give birth to you. They always have that "I gave birth to you." They always have that to hang over your head. But guilt, somebody who's always trying to make you feel guilty for everything, and always, presenting every situation as they're the victim and you're the victimizer. They're trying to manipulate you. So I want you to open your eyes to that. You're being manipulated when someone's always crying and acting hurt. And, like, if you say anything to them that they don't like, they'll start, just the tears will start coming, and they'll start saying, "Oh, now you've done it. Now you've made me cry." And so they'll use that as a way to achieve power over you. So they're acting like they're the victim and you're over them and you're the oppressor. But in reality, in that position, they're actually oppressing you. They're the one that's controlling you with that guilt, and always trying to make you feel guilty and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't mean it." And, always having to apologize for them, always having to walk on eggshells around them, so that you don't end up, hurting them, quote unquote. And they'll use that to control you. And going along with the guilt, and this one is especially difficult to deal with sometimes. Now, this isn't as common with, the narcissist, but you have gift buying. And so that narcissist will be somebody who gives you gifts all the time, always buying gifts for you. And there are things you didn't even ask for. And, people like getting gifts. They like getting free stuff. So they'll always volunteer to pay for your meals. They'll always, inundate you with gifts and spend lots of money on you and shower you with all these things. But they're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing it to control you. They're doing it to have something to hang over your head, to make you feel guilty. So if you ever, criticize them or don't like the way they talk to you or whatever, they'll always have that to fall back on. "Well, I gave you all these gifts. Well, I did this for you and I did that for you." That's the "look at all I've done for you" routine. So there's that one. And it's really terrible that somebody would use, what appears to be generosity on the surface as a means of controlling people. There's a really good episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, where Raymond's mother, Marie, does that. Like, she does something really, really nice, but then she backs that up with, "Now you owe me a favor." And she always has that favor to dangle over Deborah's head forever and ever. "You owe me a favor." She says it like a mob boss. Another one that, honestly, I think this is probably the worst. This is the most insidious of all of them, is the love-hate mixture. So, it's actually been said that if you're in a relationship with an abusive person and they're always screaming at you, they're always yelling at you, and they're always saying they hate you, and they just it's a horrible, toxic relationship, that's actually better than somebody who gives you a mixture of love and hate. So let's say that somebody, for example, like throughout the day, they're giving you kind of a mixed signals. Sometimes, man, they just love you. They give you everything that you need. They hug you. They tell you, all these encouraging things, and they tell you they love. They make you feel good. They make you feel warm inside. The next thing you know, maybe it's the same day, they're screaming at you. They hate you. They're cussing you out. They're throwing things at you. You're scum. You're holding them back, and they just make you feel horrible about yourself. So it's that mixture. It's that sometimes love, sometimes hate, that mixture. That is a horrifyingly effective way to control people, because what it does is it creates confusion. So confusion is very similar to fear in our minds, where, like, if we're fearful, we're easier to control. Well, if we're confused, we're also easier to control, because when people are confused, they're reaching for something to grab onto, something to hold on to, something that can help, get out of this. It's like they're blind. They're reaching around in the darkness trying to find their way. And so then the manipulator who caused the confusion in the first place will be the one to reach in and say, here's take my hand. I'll lead you out of this. And so that's shedding light on the tactic. And it's just really awful. It's terrible that somebody would do that they would, act like they love you half the time and act like they hate you half the time. And the reason that is so effective, so it's like the carrot at the end of the stick phenomenon. So you hold a carrot at the end of a stick, and you've always got somebody there. So if you're in a bad relationship and that person makes you feel horrible and you want out, what they'll do is they'll occasionally sprinkle it with the things that you want, the love that you want, the attention, the nurturing that you want. And that's how they actually keep you at the end of the stick. That's what keeps you from leaving, because they give you that promise that things will get better someday. And you couldn't imagine how many relationships there are out there that have been abusive and horrible and toxic for years and years and years, but the person who's being abused is still holding on to that hope that it's going to get better one day. So their narcissistic partner is always making them feel like someday things will get better. Don't worry. Someday I'll love you like you want to be loved. Someday I'll love you all the time. They use that occasional love as a way to draw that person, to keep them from ever leaving, to hold on to that eternal hope that one day it's all going to get better. So that's just why the love-hate mixture is so terrible. All right, so another one is actually toxic ways of talking about others. So if you've ever been in a relationship with this kind of person, say you're out in public and you see them, they have like a Jekyll and Hyde personality. So when they're out interacting with people, like say at a party or something, and they're just so nice to everyone, like they're high-fiving everybody, they're patting everyone on the back, and everybody loves them, and they act like they love everybody. And as soon as you get in the car and you're on the way home, they start trashing everyone. The same people they were being nice to just a few minutes ago, they just start complaining about them. That person's an idiot, and that person's scum, and I really hate that person. And the people that they were being super nice to, that they were making like them just a few minutes ago or a few hours ago, now they've totally turned on, and they're talking so bad about them behind their back. So a narcissist will always say bad things about other people, and always do it in a way that makes them sound lifted up. Like they'll lift themselves up and subtly, but they'll also always be dissing and trashing other people. Other people are always the problem. And what they're also doing is they're keeping you under their control, because it's like the fear thing. They're making the outside world, other people, radioactive. And what's also really scary about this is that, this is actually kind of similar to what Bill Cosby did. So, Bill Cosby for years was drugging and raping, young women. And how was he getting away with it? Well, he had this persona, this fake persona that he put on. He's like, I'm Bill Cosby. I've got my own show. I'm America's dad. I'm the beacon of moral authority in America. Nobody's going to believe you. So, and when he would drug and rape women, if they woke up and realized what was happening to them, and when he would leave, they would, be in tears and trying to say, I'm going to go to the police. He would just taunt them. He'd say, Who's going to believe you? I'm Bill Cosby. I'm America's dad. Nobody's going to believe you. And so the person like the narcissist who's always talking bad about others, what they're doing is that they were nice to people earlier, and now you're seeing what their real personality is like. And so you know that, sorry, my dog's barking. So you know that, like, if you go and tell people the truth, they're not going to believe you. So, like, so let's say you've been in a big fight with the narcissist, and then the phone rings, and then they go and they answer the phone, and they go, their personality switches like that. So one moment they were screaming and angry and loud and cussing you out, and the next thing you know, the phone rings and they pick up the phone and you see them switch, and they're just like, hello, and they're all nice. And that's a manipulation and control strategy, because now if you go outside and you tell the person on the other end of the phone what the person's really like, they're not going to believe you. They're like, it sends that message. Nobody's going to believe you. Everybody loves me. I'm wonderful to everybody. So they'll create, this poison towards the outside world, and they'll also use it as a way to trap you and to keep you from, ever wanting to believe. And so they're always pointing out the good things about themselves, too. That's a classic narcissist trait. They're always... So when you get into an argument with them, or when you express, disapproval of something they've done, they'll go back and they'll just start... Narcissists are good with laundry lists. They'll just have lists in their heads. They keep score. So either they'll go to the, like I said earlier, the all that I've done for you routine. They'll go back to all the gifts they've bought you or whatever. They'll also point out the good things about themselves, and in a way that distracts you from what you're angry about. So they'll say, "Oh, well, you're angry about that. Well, but I'm actually good at this, and I'm really a caring person. I'm really an attentive person. I'm really good about this and good about that." And so they'll list these positive traits that they allegedly have, even though most of those are fake. But they'll try to distract you from what you're actually angry about, and in doing so, they invalidate your feelings. The narcissist is all about the invalidation. So I guess the last one I want to talk about, and this one is also more common than we realize. Like, it doesn't sound that common to hear about adults throwing tantrums like children, but it does happen. And so this one is the silent treatment. So narcissists and manipulators will use silent treatment. So whenever you express your dislike about anything that they've done, they'll start giving you the silent treatment. They'll give you the cold shoulder. They won't speak to you. And that's actually, again, more effective at manipulating, controlling people than they realize. So just like fear, when people are fearful, they're easier to control. So the narcissist puts fear in you so that, he or she can control you. So the narcissist will also make you afraid of silence, because the thing about humans, again, going back to our early days in the wilderness, we're social creatures. We need to be around others. We need to communicate and talk with others. We need to touch others. We need to feel others. We need, that sense of belonging in a community, because it's part of what makes us feel safe. So if you go back to our prehistoric, primal ancestry, if you were cast out of the tribe and you were alone, you were in danger. You could die. You could be eaten by a lion or a predator. And so we still have those mechanisms in our minds where if you're alone, something in your mind, your internal survival instincts start to kick in, and you start feeling that sense of panic, that sense of dread or anxiety. That's your mind telling you that you're in danger, that you could be eaten, that you could be killed by predators, that you could get lost, or something terrible could happen to you. So it's a safety mechanism that's in us all. And it's actually been said recently and proposed that, like, in prison, they have solitary confinement, which is for the worst of the worst prisoners, where they're basically just locked up in a jail cell with no contact with the outside world. And it's been brought up recently that should be considered a form of cruel and unusual punishment, because prisoners who actually go through solitary confinement, whether it's for a week or however long, tend to actually go mad. They go crazy, or they commit suicide or whatever, because, again, humans are biologically hardwired in our minds to be social creatures. So being isolated and ostracized and alone like that is, your body actually goes into a state of torture. So the nerves, the way they start firing, and the way your adrenaline kicks in from the renal glands of your kidneys, it's actually the same phenomenon. It's the exact same thing that what happens when you're being tortured. The adrenaline, the dopamine, the things that are rushing through your nervous system, the alerts. So being alone is actually physically identical to your nervous system as being tortured. And again, it's just your mechanisms driving you to find others to make survival easier. And so what the narcissist does is they use that against you. So they threaten to isolate you as a means of keeping you under their control. And so when they give you silent treatments, when they, don't talk to you, when they don't speak to you, when they alienate you, they actually hurt you. They physically harm you. They actually make your system go into that torture state. And what it does is it gives them power over you. It gives them authority. Remember, narcissism is all about dominance and authority. It's about achieving dominance over the other person. And so you'll come crawling to them begging, please talk to me. Please, speak to me. Please acknowledge me. Please love me. And once again, that puts you into the bad guy. That makes you the one that has to ask for forgiveness and beg, please, do something different, please. And it gives them the position of authority. They're the ones, that can stick up their chin and say, well, you treated me horribly. I didn't like what you said, but, I'll think about forgiving you or whatever. So it gives them the power, and it takes the power away from you. And so the isolation and the loneliness and the silent treatments are actually way more effective than people realize. That's why the Amish communities do it. The Amish actually do put their children through, they call it shunning. So whenever a family member is disobedient, whether it's a child or whether it's an adult who goes against the teachings of the Amish religion, they do shunnings. They actually will isolate the person, and no one is allowed to speak to them, and they'll be absolutely silent towards that person. And that is a form of torture. That actually tortures the person. And so that's why, it's brutal and it's effective. It really does keep the Amish community, it keeps dissenters away. It keeps people from questioning the teachings. It keeps people from, thinking for themselves and having minds of their own, because they're afraid of being ostracized and isolated, And so a good manipulator will use that. Now, I've listed all these different forms of abuse and manipulation, these tactics that narcissists use to control people in their relationships. But you may or may not have recognized one of them. But, no manipulator is probably going to use all of these. These are just common examples. So manipulators will use a variety of these tactics, but not necessarily all of them. And there certainly are some that I haven't been able to include here, maybe that I've forgotten about. So I've just gone over what I think are the most common or the most effective manipulation strategies. So what do we do about it? Well, again, it's like last week, it's really hard to say what the solution to problems as deep as this are, because everybody is different, and like the brain chemistry of every single human being is different. Everybody, their situation is unique, and they may need a variety of different things to get out of these sort of things. One of the first things I will say is that you have to realize that people only have the power over you that you let them have. Now, what narcissists do with manipulation is they trick you into thinking that they have power over you when they really don't, and they have control and dominance. But you are the one that has to grant them that power. And realizing that is one of the first things and one of the most important steps to breaking free. And I said in a post on Facebook a few days ago that if you're in a narcissistic, abusive, manipulative relationship, the first step to freedom is to stop making excuses for your abuser. And that goes back to the thing I said earlier, what narcissists do is they install a copy of themselves into you. They actually make you into their puppet. So they'll install like this little clone, this mini-me version of themselves inside your subconscious. And that's why you'll always defend them. Like when someone else, questions them or says, you need to get out of that relationship. And you'll say, oh, he's not that bad. And, oh, well, he or she may have abused me, but I deserved it because I made them angry or whatever. It's like that's that miniature version of themselves. And you especially see that with children who have had abusive or narcissistic parents. Like, they will defend those parents up and down. And they'll, it's almost like you can hear the voice of their parent inside them when they say, well, if I'm too hard on mother, she'll die someday and I'll be sorry. You can almost hear her the one saying that, not him. It's like he can't even think for himself. So, it's like the alien from Aliens that's, trying to burst out of your chest. There's a foreign object inside of you, and you have to learn how to get that out, how to, take that little copy of the manipulator and rip them out of you and toss it aside so you can start to think independently for yourself. So stop making excuses for them. That is, and it can be somebody who's even dead and gone. Like if you had an abusive mother or father and they've been dead for years and you're still living with that anxiety or that depression or whatever, you'll see this over and over again when a counselor confronts them about the abuse that they suffered, they'll start defending their parent that abused them. They'll start saying, well, he really loved me in his own way. Well, my father may have been an alcoholic who beat me, but he really did love me in his own way. And again, that's the kind of mindset you have to stop. So the first step to getting better, to getting out of that depression, is to realize that it wasn't all your fault. Stop taking the blame, stop accepting the blame, and realize that the blame lies on the narcissist and the narcissist alone. Narcissists don't have relationships with people. Like a manipulator, all they do is they try to manipulate others. So they don't have relationships with people any more than a puppeteer has relationship with their puppet. A puppet is just a lifeless object, and they just use the puppet to talk. They don't have a relationship with that puppet. Likewise, the manipulator does not have a real relationship with the person that they're manipulating, even if they think they do or act like they do. All right, so we've been going on for under an hour now, so I'm really passionate about this mental health stuff. I was really glad to get to talk last week about anxiety and its origins and what causes it. And I feel like this was the logical next step to try to teach people about abusive relationships and, the true meanings of narcissism and the kind of tactics that narcissists use to manipulate people. And, what are the things that you need to do to get out of that kind of relationship? Stop making excuses. Stop, defending the person who's abusing you or making you unhappy. Realize that, for years and years and years and years, the old saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So realize that, if they've got that carrot at the end of the stick and they're always making you think it's going to start getting better soon, our relationship is going to improve soon, I'm going to stop abusing you and loving you the way you want to be loved soon, it'll be just around the corner, it's never going to get here. And when you threaten to break away, when you do leave the narcissist, you are the one who gets the power back. So I'll go ahead and stop it right there. If anybody wants to say anything or contribute anything to this discussion, feel free to leave a comment. So I've also written my blog for this week, so I'm doing a live stream and a blog at the same time. So as soon as I get done with the stream here, I'm going to upload my blog, and so keep an eye out for that for the week. Really excited about this. We're going to talk about the birth of the Pentecostal revival, which occurred at Azusa Street, and I'm going to get into the history behind that. So God bless you all. I'll see you all later. Bye.